from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
Day 16 of the shutdown, and there may be a glimmer of hope. Welcome to the Thursday edition as Senate Majority Leader John Thune promises Democrats a vote on Obamacare subsidies. We're going to get the latest from Jack Fitzpatrick at Bloomberg Government. He's live on the Hill today. President Trump is on the line right now with Vladimir Putin. As Ukraine calls for Tomahawk missiles, we're going to talk about defense spending and investments across the continent when we sit down with Nadia Calvino, the president of the European Investment Bank, with us in studio on this IMF week in Washington. And we'll have a lot more with Republican strategist Marc Short. He's got his eye on the shutdown, as does our political panel. It's all after a look at Wall Street. Charlie Pellet brings us up to date from World Headquarters in New York, the Thursday trade. Charlie, what do you have?
Right now, looking at a lot of red on the screen there, Joe Mathieu, with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they're all declining. NASDAQ 100 index back in the green. Yes, we're off session lows. S&P right now down 14, though. It's 66.57. That is a drop of 0.2%. Wall Street's AI-fueled rally sputtering as a pair of regional banks tumbled. Right now, the Dow is down 92, drop there of 0.2%. NASDAQ lower by 12, a decline there of 0.1%. Those regional banks are Zions Bancorp and also Western Alliance Bancorp. The 10-year yield 3.99% on your 10-year. The 2-year, 3.44%. Gold is at $42.81 the ounce, surging another $73, up 1.8%. Silver, $53.84 the ounce, up 1.5%. And Bitcoin right now, 109,000. That is a drop of 1.9%. So the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. Among some of the other banks reporting earnings, Bank of New York Mellon's third quarter profit trounced analyst predictions. Shares of the bank right now, they are trading lower by 0.6%. Schwab also out with earnings, up 0.7%. And U.S. Bancorp, little changed on the day, up under 0.1%. Again, recapping, stocks lower with the S&P down 22 now, down 0.3%. Balance of power continues right now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host. Here he is, Joe Mathieu.
All right, Charlie, we thank you as always. Charlie will have more in about 20 minutes time as we watch Wall Street together here on Balance of Power. Thanks for joining us. For the Thursday edition, we're live in Washington as always on Bloomberg TV and radio. And good to have you along as we consider now day 16 of a government shutdown that does not show signs of stopping. And of course, that's been the headline since this all started. But God forbid there be a glimmer of hope. It does seem like we could have fast forwarded to this moment as the Senate Majority Leader goes on of all networks, MSNBC, to make a guarantee that Democrats will get a vote on Obamacare subsidies. We had spoken repeatedly with Democratic lawmakers to see if that promise of an up or down vote would be enough to get them to sign on to a continuing resolution that would reopen the government. Some said yes, maybe, depends what form. What are we hearing? And of course, John Thune says, well, that has been the offer, at least quietly all along. He said it out loud this morning on MSNBC. Listen.
I've told him, I've said we are willing to have the conversation. I've said if you need a vote, we can guarantee you get a vote by a date certain. At some point, Democrats have to take yes for an answer. But I agree totally. We are all about getting health insurance down, making it affordable to more people.
So I hear you saying about the program that needs reforms. It sounds like you're guaranteeing that there will be a negotiation on this.
Well, what I'm saying is there's a path forward, I believe.
But yes or
no? But it has to include reform. And, can I guarantee an outcome? No.
Cannot guarantee an outcome, but can apparently guarantee a vote. Does this start to grease the skids, turn the gears? Maybe not, but we do check in with Jack Fitzpatrick. He's talking to lawmakers firsthand and brings us the latest now from Capitol Hill. Bloomberg Government Congress reporter. Jack, I know you've probably heard this before, but for some folks it's new and it might be reassuring to Democrats. Does John Thune's posture help the standoff?
Well, that's the right question. It's a matter of John Thune's posture and the specific wording he's using. We had not heard from the majority leader out loud on TV saying, yes, he can guarantee a vote in the future. That is not enough for a lot of Democrats. That doesn't meet the standards set by Hakeem Jeffries even. Generally, it doesn't sound like that's enough to move us towards an end to the shutdown, but it does represent a bit of a change, at least in rhetoric, at least in what Republicans feel they need to make sure they're saying clearly. It looks like there's a big gap still between what Republicans want and what Democrats are trying to get out of them. But if you're looking for some tea leaves, if you're looking for a little bit of movement to see if one side has the momentum over the other, it certainly is notable to see the Republican majority leader say he's comfortable saying there absolutely could be a vote on this policy demand that Democrats are making, even though he wants it to be separate from a vote to end the shutdown.
Got it. In the meantime, we're going to do daily voting on the Republican CR. Jack, I presume that's been the strategy essentially each day, working day that John Thune has had the membership here. And I ask you that knowing that the president has covered a number of paychecks for active duty military, for federal law enforcement, and they've also helped to reinforce funding for the WIC program, causing a lot of people to say, hey, then there's clearly no inflection point that's going to get everyone to the table, and we could have a record setter here. But the president has only covered one pay cycle for military paychecks. Do you know, for starters, that money will be delivered? And is there a plan for what happens in 2 weeks?
The wording from the White House in the immediate term is so clear that regardless of whatever legal questions about it, it does seem that this paycheck is being covered. But you're very right to ask about the next paycheck, because both sides have been digging in preparation for a long shutdown. And 2 weeks from now, it may not be over. And the announcements from the White House and what we've seen from the Trump administration broadly on making sure troops are being paid does not necessarily cover that. So there may be a whole new round of logistical and legal questions about how they can move money around. I'm not sure there's going to be somebody filing a lawsuit saying don't pay the troops. I'm not sure this is going to go to the courts. So there is layer upon layer of abstraction here that makes it difficult to predict. But you're right that this shutdown could go for another 2 weeks, and that raises the question of troop pay all over again.
Yeah. Now, do you say 2 weeks because of open enrollment on the 1st of November? Is that the next sort of stop on the calendar that might force a conversation?
The fact that it aligns roughly with another round of questions about troop pay is kind of convenient or inconvenient, depending on your perspective. But yes, Democrats are really focused on November 1st and the lead up to November 1st. Open enrollment is November 1st. The expectation of letters from health insurance companies that could warn of increased premiums next year is another political pressure point. So as we at least get closer to November 1st, that really is the key to the Democratic strategy. And when you hear members talk this much about November 1st, it is clear they are preparing for a shutdown that could go in excess of a month.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. Batten down the hatches was the word from Russ Vought. So, give us a taste of the culture, Jack. You're up there. What's going on? Are lawmakers hanging around their offices? Are they all at bull feathers drinking beers? Like, what do you do? And it's weeks on end of a shutdown with no off-ramp in sight.
It's very different in the House and Senate, obviously. In the Senate, they're voting over and over again.
Right.
It's Groundhog Day. They do have to make it to votes. They have to make it through scrums of reporters who are asking if there's any change in their position. It is quite repetitive because this is 10 votes now that are failed on the Republican CR. I think we're at 7 that failed on the Democratic measure. It's very repetitive, not a lot of progress. And then in the House, you have Democrats making a point to be here saying we're ready to work, but very, very quiet, almost eerily quiet in the House. Overall, compared to past shutdowns, this is a strangely repetitive but quiet one in which there really are not significant negotiations and backroom horse trading going on.
Does Speaker Johnson keep everybody out then till further notice? Will they be back next week?
He seems determined to keep them out until the shutdown is over. That's what he said over and over again. Clearly, Democrats think that is a pressure point when you see the focus on Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva, who has still not been sworn in. The accusations that Johnson is doing this to hold up progress on the measure to require the release of Jeffrey Epstein documents. It may get more and more uncomfortable for him to maintain that position as time goes on. But he has not wavered. He has said there's no negotiating, no work to be done unless the shutdown ends. And I don't see any signs of him changing his mind at this point.
There you have it from Jack Fitzpatrick. Take it to the bank for now. I have a feeling we're going to be talking to Jack a little more before they have this settled. He's a Bloomberg government congressional reporter and has been knee-deep in this conversation for more than 16 days. It's 16 days of the shutdown now, but we've been talking about this going back weeks before it happened. When the votes take place, we'll, of course, let you know. The other major story that we're following today brings us to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Donald Trump on Truth Social. Just before we came to air, this is now almost 2 hours ago. I am speaking to President Putin now, he wrote. We did give a headline a bit earlier that they were expected to speak today. The conversation, he says, is ongoing, a lengthy one, and I will report the contents, as will President Putin, at its conclusion. Thank you for your attention to this matter. This call could still be underway. It may have ended and we haven't seen another post yet. We don't know. But of course, there was a question about tomahawks, along with other defensive weaponry that came from President Zelenskiy. He's going to be meeting with President Trump tomorrow. This 48-hour period could be critical in determining the next phase of the war in Ukraine. And it's coming against the backdrop, of course, of calls for additional defense investments across the continent, which is why it's a pleasure to be able to spend some time with Nadia Calvino, the president of the European Investment Bank, which I want you to think of as the financial arm, if you will, of the European Union. President, it's great to have you with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Washington on this IMF week. I hope your meetings have been going well.
Yes, they're going really well, very interesting. It's always a pleasure to be back here in Bloomberg.
Well, I appreciate that very much here. According to our reporting, the European Union is laying out a 5-year plan when we consider investment across the continent to help rearm and restrain Russia. To what extent is the EIB involved in that broad investment that will clearly take years to realize?
Indeed, the European Investment Bank, as the financing arm of the European Union, has an important role to play in stepping up Europe's capabilities in the area of security and defense. There are many different needs, and we are very well placed to finance some key large infrastructures, critical infrastructures, military facilities, also research, production capacity, for example, drone manufacturing, and also financial support to small and medium-sized companies in the supply chain of large European contractors. It is unfortunate. I think that we are living this situation, but Europe has a very clear vision of where to go, and the European Investment Bank is helping get there.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're seeing a lot of these smaller defense companies, in some cases startups, that are reinventing the way that we look at this, and in some cases challenging the old line big defense contractors when it comes to different contracts. You mentioned drones, which is something that is a big deal here in the conversation about defense technology, that the EIB is ready to invest millions of euros in Europe's drone defenses. How would that be doled out, and how are you looking at that as a continent as opposed to a collection of countries?
Well, right now, we have a very robust pipeline of more than 30 flagship projects in the different areas I mentioned. But we're following very attentively the upcoming meeting of leaders, of prime ministers and presidents that will take place next week, the European Council meeting, to see what is their vision precisely when it comes to reinforcing the eastern border of the EU, also drone manufacturing and protection against enemy drones, etc. And we will be ready to help and support in those areas where we have most value added.
I can tell you that the president's phone call with Vladimir Putin has just ended.
Okay.
President, I just want to take a look at what he's writing here. He says, we've just concluded the telephone call, and it was a very productive one, says Donald Trump. President Putin congratulated me and the United States on the great accomplishment of peace in the Middle East, something that he said had been dreamed of for centuries. He goes on to try to connect the Middle East to the war in Ukraine here, even mentions the First Lady. Says they spent a lot of time talking about trade between Russia and the U.S. when the war with Ukraine is over, and said that at the conclusion of the call, we agreed that there will be a meeting of our high-level advisors next week. The United States initial meetings will be led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, together with various other people, to be designated, a meeting location to be determined. And then he says he and Putin will meet in an agreed-upon location, Budapest, Hungary, to see if we can bring this inglorious war to an end. He refers to the Zelenskiy meeting tomorrow, in which he will discuss his conversation with President Putin. So we have another meeting. Does this kind of talk sound productive to you, or more of the same?
Oh, well, I think it's very good to call this an inglorious war. This is Putin's war, a war of aggression, a war of choice. From the European Union's perspective, we want this war to finish as soon as possible. So whatever, can get us to a fair and stable peace, of course, it has to be fair and stable if we want it to be permanent. should be welcomed, of course.
When we consider the need for energy and the war over Russian oil, which I think is its own story altogether, would the EIB help cover Ukrainian purchases of U.S. LNG if that helped to end the war sooner?
We have just signed a 300 million deal with Ukraine. I had a meeting with the Prime Minister Sirvidenko yesterday. And we're looking into options to step it up even so that they can replenish their gas reserves for the winter. We are also supporting Ukraine when it comes to rebuilding critical infrastructures, including transport and energy. And we are supporting Ukraine when it comes to rebuilding supporting the daily lives of Ukrainians so that they can live lives that are as normal as possible, in this totally extraordinary and terrible circumstance. Rebuilding hospitals, schools, kindergartens, protecting the infrastructure so that children can go to school. I think this is essential if we want to protect a strong basis for the recovery once the war is over.
There's so much that we can talk about that is depressing. The idea of rebuilding is the definition of optimism. And I'd love to hear how far you allow yourself to not only think about it, but to plan for it, because obviously this is a war that could end soon. And an enormous amount of work will be done and money required from governments and private industry. How far have you planned this out?
I am very grateful for your question, and I'm going to also smile, and I say,
absolutely.
I actually think I am very confident that Ukraine will bounce back very strongly once the war is over, because I have seen the determination, the resilience, the commitment of Ukrainians. I have also seen the very strong infrastructures of the country, and we have been supporting them for more than 2 years to make sure that the country has a strong basis on which to build this reconstruction, and also to pave the way for a successful accession to the European Union. So I am confident, we just need Putin to stop the war, and then we can move on to a new phase which can be more constructive.
Is rebuilding Ukraine years or decades?
I tend to think it's years. Actually, because we are talking about a country that continues to live a quite normal life, in these circumstances. The government has managed to keep a financial management which responds to a normal budget, to a normal administration, despite, of course, the immense needs that are related to the war. And so I think that the sooner we can move to the next phase, the better.
That is obviously a best case scenario, I guess, at this point. When it comes to European commitments like the one that we mentioned for buying U.S. LNG, do you want to see a matching commitment from the United States? Or do you think the administration has done what it can, at least financially speaking? Well,
right now, I think we all have to focus in supporting Ukraine. And obviously, military support is of the essence. European countries are clearly stepping up their support, not only to protect ourselves, to protect the European Union, but also to support Ukraine. Countries are taking quite novel, quite innovative measures to provide this support. And I think this is the essential thing so that we can see an end to the war. And then we will have to see how everybody contributes to supporting the recovery of the country.
Fascinating to spend some time with you, President Calvino. Thank you so much for being with us today in Washington here on Bloomberg. I hope the rest of your IMF week is productive.
Thank you.
Stay in touch with us and come see us again, because this is a story that's very important to us and one that's not likely going away anytime soon. President Trump's call with Vladimir Putin has just ended. We'll have much more on this ahead, remembering that at this time tomorrow, we'll be talking about his meeting in the Oval Office with President Zelenskiy. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. We'll assemble our political panel next, right here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg. Breaking news in Washington. The phone call has ended with Vladimir Putin, that is. Trump and Putin back on the line today, just 24 hours before President Trump hosts Volodymyr Zelenskiy in the Oval Office. Yes, Zelenskiy's here tomorrow, having made the ask for Tomahawk missiles. Don't know if the president talked about the Tomahawks as he said he would. But we did get a readout on the call from the president on Truth Social, and it's a doozy of a post. I won't go through the whole thing again. What a moment to be here, by the way, with the president of the European Investment Bank, just as that note hit. Thanks as well to Nadia Calvino for her clutch analysis. At the conclusion of the call, President Trump says, and I don't have a runtime on you, but it looks like it could have gone about 2 hours based on the posts that came before and immediately after. We agree there will be a meeting of our high-level advisors next week, all right? We've got 2 meetings here. High-level advisors, initial meetings led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio with various other people, he says, to be designated. A meeting location to be determined. President Putin and I will then meet in an agreed-upon location, Budapest, Hungary, to see if we can bring this inglorious war between Russia and Ukraine to an end. Viktor Orban rising here today as we assemble our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital, alongside Aisha Mills, Democratic strategist principal at Community Asset Management. It's great to have you both with us today. Rick, Viktor Orban, who, of course, appeared at CPAC here in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago, a friend of the president, has somehow corralled this meeting for his backyard, or maybe Donald Trump asked for him to do this. What will another meeting bring to ending this war?
Yeah, I actually wouldn't be surprised that Vladimir Putin didn't ask for it to be in Budapest. I think that's sort of Moscow, in the NATO. So we know Viktor Orban's been opposed to much of the support NATO has given to Ukraine. So it's certainly not a very good indication just from the symbolism of it all to Ukraine to think that somehow they're going to go to a neutral location. Hungary is anything but a neutral location to the Ukrainians. And of course, we saw that the last meeting that Donald Trump created expectations for a deal with Vladimir Putin in Alaska was a massive bust. No matter what the spin was, it turned out to be, maybe one of the worst summits in presidential history. Putin walked away with a lot of fanfare, and a president sort of kowtowed to him and offered nothing in return. So I would expect the White House and the negotiators like Secretary of State would really expect something in return before this meeting takes place. A much more traditional summit where the outcome is preordained and that the optics are the only thing left.
Okay, well, I don't know your thoughts on this, Aisha, but if you're President Zelenskiy, did you just get a chill down your spine?
I am an American, and I just got a chill down my spine. The fact that the president is literally freelancing with foreign policy right now should give us all pause. And we should have grave concerns about what he's doing on the phone with Vladimir Putin for 2 hours. This, to me, does not sound like diplomacy. It really sounds like he's being coached on how to be a dictator. And the fact that, he kind of is doing this and we're all talking about it like it's normal, to me, is really what is most dangerous, especially we're in the middle of there's a live war that's happening right now. Every time we see Trump cozy up with Putin, it is just a reminder that he is more aligned with autocrats than he is with actual Americans. And so I am completely just miffed by the fact that this is happening, that he is on Truth Social posting about it, and that somehow we're all supposed to feel some comfort or resolve in the way that our diplomatic dealings are happening, because this is not okay. And more importantly, the way that, Trump continues to cozy up with and have all of these off-the-wall ad hoc contacts with dictators and autocrats really should make us fearful about the kind of leadership that we see him implementing here in this country.
This is Thursday, Rick, the meeting, or the phone call, I should call it, with Vladimir Putin. What will Friday bring with President Zelensky? We all know that Donald Trump can oscillate from one side to the other pretty quickly.
Yeah, certainly going into this call with Putin, everybody's expectation was Trump's finally landed in the corner of Zelenskiy and the Ukrainian people, and we're going to fight to try and get something done with Russia. Yeah, some nice optics around the idea of giving Tomahawk weapons to Ukraine that could reach Moscow. He spent very little time, really sort of relitigating with Putin the idea of, a peace deal right away. And And now we have completely a reversal of that, seemingly. I mean, I don't want to speak too hastily that somehow tomorrow's meeting with Zelensky isn't going to be a good one. Zelensky wants a deal too, right? Zelensky wants peace, and that whether you like it or not, that's going to run through Donald Trump. And so Zelensky's got his own capabilities to influence the president, and certainly is on the right side. So let's see what happens. But keep your fingers crossed, because the only thing worse than a government shutdown is Zelensky in the Oval Office.
Oh, wow. Does this mean no tomahawks, Rick, or we need to wait for tomorrow?
I think you got to wait. Look, Donald Trump's an unpredictable character. Aisha, makes the point that you really don't know what you're going to get, when you open up that box. And I refrain from saying he's a box of chocolate. And yet at the same time, the wheels have been in motion at the Defense Department to queue up tomahawks. And so the idea that this could be something that could get done was, I think, pretty acceptable to the defense establishment. So we'll see. I'm not ruling it out, and I'm not ruling out other support that we could give to the Europeans in order to help support the war at this stage.
Aisha, Sisi asks the question, does this come down to whomever speaks to Trump last, who wins the war?
I mean, is this middle school? Like, this is, I don't know, guys. I just think that all of this is just completely frightening and preposterous, that this is how we're literally talking about. We're not talking about peace or the Ukrainian people or the stability of Europe, which are really the conversations we should be having. We're talking about whether our president likes a guy. It's completely, nerve wracking to me. So I do hope that, this goes well. But frankly, I'm not confident that it will.
We're talking about, of course, the war in Ukraine, but there are a lot of questions about the president's foreign policy this week, with revelations yesterday now confirmed. It was first a report, Rick, in the Wall Street Journal, acknowledged by the White House, that President Trump has approved a covert CIA operation inside Venezuela. They are apparently not armed and engaged, but they are obviously busy there and potentially setting the stage for an operation that could be larger. We've now blown up a half dozen boats coming out of Venezuela, said to be carrying drugs. The Maduro government is outraged by this whole thing. But what do we think the CIA is up to there, if not actually mapping targets for what could be an attack by the United States?
Look, I mean, I think it's, wrong to speculate on what potential CIA operators are doing in a hostile country. The reality is there's a lively opposition there that needs help being organized and supported. So it could be something as benign as, domestic politics. And yet, on the other hand, this president seems to be on a war footing with Venezuela. He not only has he attacked these drug runners coming out of Venezuela, but they've also moved a lot of big military assets, submarines and frigates and destroyers into the Caribbean to be staged near Venezuela. And so, this is a president that means business. I don't think we should discount the fact that he's prepared to pull the trigger on any kind of kinetic effort to engage the Venezuelans. I guess the question that I would raise is, what's the outcome? I mean, what has been asked of the Venezuelans and the Maduro administration in order to solve this problem? Because it is now a shooting war, and the question is, over what?
It's a great question, Aisha. The president said yesterday, I authorized it for two reasons. Of course, he could have taken a pass on this question. He says Venezuelan leaders emptied their prisons into the United States of America. That's one. And two, we have a lot of drugs coming in from Venezuela. Is he seeking regime change or something else?
Here's the issue that I have, sir. Certainly, we want to make sure that there are not drug cartels, flooding the United States. Of course, we certainly wouldn't want that. My concern is that this president is making really broad blanket statements with absolutely zero evidence. It's alleged that these boats that he's shooting up are presumably, bringing drugs or whatever it is. But do we have real evidence and proof of that? Congress doesn't know what's going on. The president has not issued us anything that really will help the American public understand definitively why Venezuela is suddenly the biggest threat to the United States that warrants this type of action. And that's my concern, is the complete and total lack of transparency. Frankly, just, take his word for it, because he, bellowed out something. And we know that much of what he has to say is misinformation, disinformation, half-truths, and a lot of poking out his chest and making declarations that we don't necessarily have a lot of evidence to back up. And so I would just like to understand more from this administration. If it matters that they carry this out, why?
Yeah, a lot of questions with our panel that have yet to be answered. Aisha Mills and Rick Davis, many thanks to both of you for your insights. We'll have much more ahead as we're joined by Marc Short, Republican strategist, veteran of the first Trump administration on day 16 of the shutdown. This is Bloomberg, connecting the dots here between Washington and Wall Street every day on Balance of Power. Thanks for joining us on Bloomberg TV and radio. The phone call has ended. If you're just joining us, Donald Trump spent some time today with Vladimir Putin talking about the war in Ukraine. It wasn't in person this time. They were on the phone, and it appears, at least based on the Truth Social posts, that call was approaching 2 hours in length. The president back on social media to announce the conclusion of the phone call. And there is some news here. It does not involve tomahawks or even a potential end of the war, but another round of meetings. High-level advisors, he says, will meet next week. Location and attendance other than the Secretary of State to be determined. But he says President Putin and I will then meet in an agreed-upon location, Budapest, Hungary, to see if we can bring this inglorious war between Russia and Ukraine to an end. Remembering, of course, that he meets with Vladimir Zelenskiy tomorrow in the Oval Office. And the president refers to that, saying he will discuss his conversation with Putin and much more. I believe great progress was made with today's telephone conversation. Helping us quantify that progress, if it's possible, is Lauren Dezenski, Bloomberg's White House correspondent, on the case today and with us here in our Washington bureau. Lauren, it's great to see you. This meeting tomorrow was already high stakes. If you're President Zelensky, reading this probably doesn't give you a lot of hope that tomahawks are on the way. Yeah.
Considering that this is the war that Trump wants to resolve, perhaps maybe there could be an opening for Zelensky to push. Trump has really talked about how this inglorious war, as he put it today, is the last remaining one that he really wants to solve. And so maybe something will be different. Maybe conditions have changed. That was one of the big questions. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, was on Fox News right before Trump posted on Truth Social. And she basically said that, Trump and Putin talked about trade, something may be happening, essentially. And to what extent Trump can use this call with Putin as leverage with Zelensky to ultimately bring everyone to the table. Clearly, something has had to change. Something has shifted. Trump obviously doesn't also want a replay of what happened in Alaska, where he brought Putin out. There was a flyover, cameras, etc., and then not a whole lot came from it. Are we just going to get another round of 2-week extensions for this thing that never actually happened? Probably not. So whether or not tomahawks are on the menu tomorrow, TBD. But if I were Zelensky, in the very least, I'd be pushing for that, because there could be an opening there.
Well, they're going to have the opportunity in the Oval, remembering that their first meeting in the Oval Office didn't go so well. There was a follow-on visit to the White House that Zelensky thought was quite productive, in fact. The whole narrative, though, that Donald Trump had sort of shifted allegiances to sort of empathize with Ukraine based on his frustration with Vladimir Putin doesn't seem to be echoed in this post. You wonder what kind of a phone call this was and what Putin had to tell him.
Yes, the words being used are very productive, and that's really all we know. We also know that Trump kind of goes back and forth on things like this. Look at how he reacts to China. We have very good phone calls and then tariff threats and things following through with tariffs. It changes moment to moment based off of these discussions. And I think, for what it's worth, Putin's breakthrough with the First Lady, with returning the Ukrainian children that Russia took during the war, I think that possibly created some goodwill with Trump toward Putin that paved this phone call and then pushed forward. So I think that might be something there. But again, I think we'll just have to see.
Yeah, you mentioned the summit in Alaska. Rick Davis referred to that, I think, as the least successful summit in presidential history, or one of them. But there was no framework to take away. And remember, they decided spontaneously at the beginning of a global news conference to take no questions. So we really don't know what came from the ride in the limousine or the brief meeting that they had.
But there was a flyover, Joe.
Well, it was a big flyover. That's true. And I suspect maybe there will be in Budapest. But the question that we're asking is, will there be anything hammered out in advance, as you might have seen in a traditional presidential summit, where the terms have been already laid out and the meeting is really a formality?
You would think that, so next week we know at least that there is a high-level meeting of advisors between Trump and Putin. Their advisors are meeting next week, location unknown. And while we know that Trump and Putin will meet in Budapest, that timing is unknown. One would assume that the traditional diplomatic process of the high-level advisors hashing things out ahead of time would then lay the groundwork for some sort of agreement going forward. But of course, this is a three-legged stool, and Ukraine needs to be involved. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, at least was the Biden administration's phrasing there. So to what extent the U.S. and Russia can hash something out without Ukraine stands to be seen. And I think also like that makes the timing of Zelenskyy's visit to the White House tomorrow quite good and quite advantageous. And Trump, for, whatever people want to say about the deals that are made and the types of deals that they are, he does have a way of kind of pushing through and creating conditions to yield results that would not have existed otherwise. I mean, look at the hostage release in Israel and Gaza and Hamas. There's to be clear, the subsequent situation that has occurred is, very much kind of up in the air, and what that deal looks like is a little tenuous. But something did happen there. And so when it comes to any sort of substantive deal between the U.S. and Russia and Ukraine, I think the next 48 hours are going to be really instructive.
Yeah. It's great to have you with us here covering the White House for us at Bloomberg. Lauren Dezenski with the Truth Socials flying, and of course a meeting that we were waiting for. It has now concluded. Lauren, it's great to have you back as always. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Speaking of, by the way, the war in Gaza and the tenuous ceasefire that Lauren refers to, the president just posting again on Truth Social about Hamas. He's been busy on a number of fronts here. If Hamas continues to kill people in Gaza, he writes, which was not the deal, we will have no choice but to go in and kill them. Thank you for your attention to this matter. The president's been asked repeatedly recently if that would involve American boots on the ground. And so far, the answer has been no, but it's unclear how he might pursue these goals in the meantime. It's day 16 of the government shutdown. We've been reminding you of this, and Jack Fitzpatrick gave us a pretty good readout at the top of the hour. There is some hope about backroom conversations. That's been the case for days now, but there's also hope that John Thune is now essentially guaranteeing a vote to extend Obamacare subsidies. This is something that is not new, according to Thune, or the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He spoke to reporters earlier today. Let's listen.
He offered to Chuck Schumer a vote on Obamacare subsidies, and Schumer said no. that happened. Asked Leader Thune about it because they wanted a guaranteed outcome. Here's why we can't do that. Let me say this very clearly and for everyone again. Okay. The Obamacare subsidy issue is not the issue of today. It is in a subsidy that expires December 31. We were always planning to continue the debate and discussion about that issue in October and November. Ironically, Democrats are taking the time off the clock for us to do that.
Okay, so John Thune got everybody's hopes up on MSNBC this morning, of all networks. Now Speaker Johnson is there to maybe put a little cold water on this. Maybe nothing has changed. That's why we want to talk to Marc Short, former Chief of Staff to Vice President Mike Pence. He was also the liaison to Congress Congressional Director in the original Trump administration, Marc Short. Welcome back. It's great to see you.
Joe, thanks for having me.
Are we closer to this being resolved, or?
I think you're closer just because of a timeline.
So no, not really.
Well, but not so much because of the policies. Look, I think this has always been the out. You and I have talked about this, is that eventually I think Republicans will cave on the Obamacare subsidies.
Yeah.
And that was always the way that this is going to resolve itself because of the timeline of those. But I think that Speaker Johnson is right. I think this has always been on the table as far as a vote. It's interesting that Democrats didn't jump on that. And I think, Joe, the reason is because I think they're feeling more and more confident in their own position here, which is a surprise because I think traditionally when Republicans have forced shutdowns, eventually, the American people look at it and say, well, who forced this? And they don't get rewarded for it. I think in this case, Democrats forced the shutdown, but I think they're feeling that they're going to win on the Obamacare subsidies issue. So a vote, being given a vote now is no longer sufficient for them. They want a desired outcome.
Deal, sure. When you were legislative director in the first Trump term, you would have been making phone calls this week saying, hey, you know what? We got the troops paid. We've got federal law enforcement. We got money for WIC. These are really interesting moves that the administration has been making to say, well, in the words of Russ Vought, we're hunkering down for a long one.
I think they are, because I also think that the administration actually is sort of, engaged at a level above Congress. The president is in Israel striking historic deals. The president's looking for the next negotiation in Ukraine. He's looking to his trade deal with Xi coming up in November. And so I think that they're at a whole different level, and they sort of like Congress is beneath them, so why get mired into that right now? So I think there isn't as much interest in the White House to engage, which I think also slows down a negotiation to resolve the shutdown.
It does, right? I mean, you've got Mike Johnson saying this could be the longest ever. Is that where your head is?
I'm not sure it's the longest ever, because I still think that the next sort of backstop on this, Joe, is November 1, when the announcements of the new insurance premiums go out.
Right.
And so I think that's going to be a pressure point.
Do Republican governors start crying at that point?
I think probably so. I mean, I think what's to go back, when we failed in our effort to repeal Obamacare, one of the most untold stories of that is it was really Republican governors, because so many of the Obamacare subsidies, they were getting Medicaid funding. They did not want that to stop. Wow. And they were calling legislators, asking them not to vote to repeal Obamacare.
So wait, that's a really important story to recall. This could be happening again right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of pressure from Republican governors. I think there's enough Republican members who represent districts. Look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, for instance, who's been out there saying that we need to extend the subsidies. I personally think it's terrible policy. I think that the Democrats were really shrewd in basically winning over insurance companies by promising subsidies.
Interesting.
That, it started at 400% of the poverty level, Joe, and now we're above that to be providing subsidies. But I think politically, there's enough Republicans willing to go along with it that that's going to still be the outcome of this.
With conditions, right? Republicans obviously have something on paper that's going to say an income cap of what, $200,000, a point of expiration. I mean, the idea was that at some point these would not be made permanent, although I know a lot of Democrats want it to be.
There'll be a point of expiration, but that's what we have right now.
That's when the next shutdown happens.
That's what we have right now.
Yes.
There's a point of expiration during the COVID, and since that this was legislated to extend them for 2 years. And so I think that, the hardest thing to do is to end the government program, Joe. And so I think that even though you might have a temporary end date, it'll be hard to see that there'll be the political muscle to end it at that point, too.
Democrats say Donald Trump made the 2017 tax cuts permanent. Why can't we make this permanent?
Well, again, I think that the Democrats created a government-run healthcare system. There's been a total disaster that continues to create more and more and more government funding. I don't think people are happy with it, but they've created the system where it's too expensive if we don't extend the subsidies.
Yeah.
And that's just the ongoing problem that we're in now.
John Thune's doing more than promising Obamacare votes, and we've got just about a minute left here. He's going to have a vote on the NDAA potentially by the end of the day. What do you make of that strategy to see if we can get Democrats to come to the floor to vote for something?
I think it's really smart, because either you're saying, hey, we want to continue with government funding or continue the business of the Senate, or we're in a shutdown.
Right.
And so I think it's smart for them to keep putting forward votes of that nature, whether or not it's funding DOD or now NDAA. I think those are smart moves.
Does that shake a couple Democrats loose? Maybe vote for a CR?
I think it could shake them one or two loose on these individual bills.
Got it.
I think that the CR is not going to be solved until you get around November 1st, and you have, again, a push on the subsidies.
We're going to be eating turkey still talking about this, right? I don't know. Don't answer that. Marc Short with us in the flesh. Great to see you, as always. Republican strategist Marc Short on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. We'll have the latest on the shutdown. Yes, day 16. And look ahead to tomorrow's meeting with President Zelenskiy when we meet on the late edition of Balance of Power. That's 5 p.m. Eastern. Stay with us here on Bloomberg.